Thanks a lot. Is this thing working? Can you guys hear me? Okay. Okay, then I'm just going to keep saying stuff, and who knows what may come out. This could be a day at the Improv. There are a lot of you, and I want you to know that I'm scared of all of you. Not individually necessarily, just collectively. I'm sure you're all really nice people, but together, you scare me to death. But anyway, here we go. I'm just going to start talking about some stuff. Yeah, as mentioned, my name is Chad Dezern, and I'm the studio director at Insomniac Studio next door in Durham. And just about a month ago, on October 18th, we released our first game from the studio, and it was called Ratchet Clank All for One. And this was the first fully cooperative Ratchet Clank game that we've ever made. And when I look back on the whole production, which took a couple years for us to put together, I think that it was really a process of us kind of refining our brainstorming process in a lot of different ways. For us as a company, this game was a lot about keeping the series fresh for ourselves. We've now made 8 Ratchet Clank games, so we knew that if we could keep ourselves engaged and excited and generating new ideas, then we could have a good shot at making something that would also be exciting for our players, and also giving our players something new that they really wanted to see. So the timing of this talk is actually pretty good because many things are fresh in my mind, and I was able to kind of look back over everything that happened during production and try to piece some of that chaos together in a slightly more rational way. And so that's why this presentation is called The Care and Feeding of Ideas, which sounds totally corny, and I totally know this. But it's also not corny for us in some ways because ideas are really what we do as a business. Ideas are what fuels the game. They're what makes everything come together. They're what gets people excited and talking about the game we're making. And ideas are probably important for what you do or for what you want to do as well. I mean, if you're a graphic designer, if you're in advertising, marketing, any of these things, any profession has, I think, some element of what I'm going to talk about. And actually, that's something that I'm really interested in hearing more about. Like, if you listen to me talk about this, and you think that's really only interesting for adults who make video games, then tell me that, because I'm curious. If you hear things that are, I don't know, common threads that kind of ring true, that you see as being a part of what you do either in the classroom or at work, let me know. I'm really curious to hear how this applies. And I'm always fascinated to hear how other people approach some of the same problems that I'm going to talk about today. So the About Me was already covered pretty well, but I'll add a little bit to it. I did get started in 1995 at Disney Interactive, and this was a very different world in a lot of ways. Back then, it was feasible to get out of college with a portfolio full of sketches and oil paintings and just a few digital pieces done on the Amiga and actually get a job in video games. And obviously things have evolved a lot, come a very long way since then. But at that time, Disney was just looking for people who kind of fit their company criteria of what an artist was all about. So I got to learn the computer later on the job. And that was a great thing. I got to learn 3D software. I got to see how this part of the process could plug into something that had real ambitions artistically. And I think back on that time as the era of irrational exuberance. There were all these crazy game projects in production. Some of them went somewhere a little bit. A lot of them didn't go anywhere. But it was a really fun time to learn and get started. And after Disney, I spent a little bit of time at DreamWorks Interactive, which was a similar experience. That was a place that was maybe even more tapped into the process of making a game with a team. So I got to learn a lot about what it was like to be in a room with, at that time, 15 or 16 other people just working hard to solve problems and just make something fun in the purest sense without a whole lot of other reference to look at. So after a while at DreamWorks, I still remember the day I left work with a friend and went shopping at the Best Buy, and I picked up the new game Spyro the Dragon. And we took it back to the office, and we played it, and my jaw dropped. actually I was kind of depressed because I was looking at something that was so much better than what I had just worked on. You know, here was a game that had this wonderful sense of polish, this great sense of fun, little clever touches everywhere. This was a game that showed like solid color sense and just a really good sense of composition. Things you didn't see in games that often. If you think back to the year that Spyro came out, and this would have been about 97, I think, you know, games were kind of a bit of a mess. I mean, you know, just a polygonal nightmare. People were still figuring out how to make a 3D space that was fun to run around in. But here was a company who had figured out how to push it ahead a little bit. So I was extremely fortunate to get a call just a week later, I mean, just weird fate, about an open position at Insomniac, and I jumped all over it. And that was 13 years ago. I've been at the company ever since, and I've been extremely lucky to always have an opportunity that was something that interested me to move into. So I started out as an environment artist. Then I was a lead artist and an art director on like some of the Resistance games and the first PS3 Ratchet Clank titles. And then I got this great opportunity in 2009 to move to North Carolina and launch a new studio in Durham. So that's where I am now, and that's why I'm talking to you now. So a little bit more about Insomniac too. You know, we're an independent developer. The company was launched in 1994 by three guys. It's a classic garage shop story. Ted Price just really wanted to buy himself a Silicon Graphics workstation because he loved computer graphics. So he got one, and then he found a couple of programmer friends, like referred to him from someone else. They got together. This was Al and Brian Hastings, and the three of them made a really impressive little game demo that got a lot of traction, and the rest is history. The main thing to know about these three guys is that all of them just really love making and playing games, even now. And back then, I think back to when I started at the company, it wasn't uncommon for us all to have our headphones on, working, staring at our monitors late at night. You know, Ted would come around with a new game and just like excitedly like pull you away from your work and ask you to play the game, which isn't something that happens all that often. But it's a place where there was really just a lot of passion for the whole process of putting games together, and we hope that it's still that way. And this is totally gratuitous, but I just really like this photo because this is the Ratchet games have done well in Japan, and the Japanese Ratchet has giant like black caterpillar-like eyebrows, and so the suit has that going on, and there was a Clank suit as well. So I love it that these things exist, and it makes me happy in ways that I cannot describe. You know, we also try to be an inspiring environment, and maybe one of the things we're proudest of is the fact that we've won a lot of Best Places to Work awards over the years. That's 13 total from different organizations who have seen fit to recognize the work that we've done. You know, I think that's because on some level, we try to be a place where people come and grow in their careers and have a great time doing it, and also because we're independent, we can still try to create the type of games we'd like to play. So we're not at the mercy of a marketing group or any external force telling us what we have to make. It's always driven by what we're most interested in, which it's a good position to be in, and we hopefully don't take it lightly. I mean, I feel really lucky to be able to do that. So games over the years, we started out with Disruptor back when the company was absolutely minuscule. This was actually a critically well-regarded shooter on the PlayStation at a time when there weren't a lot of shooters in the world. This was mostly like sprite-based enemies. It looks really funny now, but it was really well crafted. It has hilarious FMV sequences that were made with looks like a cardboard box with dials on it for the set, and this was a big deal back then. Spyro the Dragon, as I mentioned earlier, came after that. Just a really, really well-polished title that had some broad appeal, and we made several of those. There was Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage. This is about when I started. And then Spyro Year of the Dragon, where we added tons of playable characters, most of which I can remember the names of at this point. I remember that was Bentley the Yeti back there, though. He had a club. It's fun game to work on. Sorry, I'm having clicker issues right now. The first Ratchet & Clank game came out for the PlayStation 2, and that spawned the whole Ratchet series. There was Going Commando, Up Your Arsenal, because we're totally mature about names. Deadlocked, which was actually our first foray into just a little bit of co-op in the game. We had Resistance Fall of Man was our PlayStation 3 launch title. And this one was interesting because it was obviously a big tonal shift for us. You know, we went from the bright, colorful Ratchet universe to this gritty, you know, take on what the world would be like in an alternate history if aliens descended in the early 50s. And this was also, like I mentioned, a launch title, so we had to kind of make things up as we went along, not having all the technology in place, and just hope that our guesses were correct. As it turns out, they mostly weren't. But we still finished it and shipped it, and you know, everything worked out okay. We loved the Ratchet series so much that we revived it for the PlayStation 3, and the first one we made for the PS3 was Ratchet & Clank Future Tools of Destruction. You know, we really kept a lot of the framework intact, but started increasing the quality of the visuals in a lot of ways. Very fun game to work on. Quest for Booty, again, very mature, was like a very small title. It was about 4 hours long, and this was an experiment to see where it would go if we made something that was just a little like polished, bite-sized chunk of gameplay. Resistance 2 followed up the first Resistance. This one was a lot about giant set pieces. So everything we tried to do, we thought of how big we thought it should be, and we thought of how, like, what would be a bad idea, and then we like increased it. Like, it would be a bad idea to have a 50-meter alien. Let's do 80 meters, stuff like that. Just like a lot of huge scale pieces in this game. Then Ratchet & Clank Future, A Crack in Time came out just a couple years ago now. And Resistance 3 just came out this year, and this was a big deal for us because for the first time, and in part because of the new studio, we had 2 games coming out in the same year. So just about a month after that, we released Ratchet & Clank All for One, which was again the first game we made here in North Carolina, and this was our first attempt at really building the game from the ground up for cooperative play. You know, we had a vision of everyone getting together on their couch with friends and family and playing, and that's what we pulled off. So let's see, where was I? Yes, so that's a bit about Insomniac, and really what I'm going to talk about today is it's about the life cycle of ideas through an entire project. So, you know, I'm not just talking about brainstorming with that. I mean, we don't have a lot of trouble brainstorming. You know, I don't think many people have trouble brainstorming really. You know, we will totally like mess up some whiteboards. Like whiteboards see us, they tremble in fear with their googly marker eyes staring at us. If you have whiteboards, you should hide them from us because we will write things all over them. That's kind of like the part that comes naturally and freely. But what this talk is about is really the hard part. Brainstorming is certainly part of the equation, but I don't think it's the hardest part of the equation. The hard part is really what happens after the brainstorm, where we take these ideas and we shape them into something real. So it's this process of having the discipline to start out with something that's just a thumbnail sketch, and through lots and lots of hard work, like let it reach its resolution gradually to the final product that's ready to ship, that it should always be. So this is really a talk that's not about just brainstorming, but about shipping. It's about taking an idea that's really nothing but, you know, a few written words, and taking it all through the process and getting it ready for the world to see, turning it into something real. When we go through this process, it's really broken down into 3 broad stages. And the first one is that we visualize. You know, we decide what we want to do. We talk through the specifics of what we want to make. And this part is just about defining and capturing. It's about defining our goals for the idea and then capturing a lot of good ideas that could realize those goals. The second part of the equation is about prototyping. And this is also known as the part where we argue a lot, because at this point we're narrowing ideas down. And this part is really about testing and evaluating. We're seeing if our ideas really stack up to what we set out to do in the beginning, and then deciding where to take them from there. And then finally, when everything is lined up and ready to go at the prototype stage, we produce. This is when we know exactly what we're making, and the process is just about making it. So when we're producing, when we're in production, it's about refining the idea and then shipping it to get it out the door for other people to play. This is the part of the process that makes us very tired, incidentally. So as I talk about this, like I want to talk about one idea specifically, and this started out, and I still remember when it came up. This started out as an idea for an alien fishing village. Really talented artist named Dave Gerton grew up in New England. We've done a lot of locations, but we've never done a fishing village. This idea came out in a meeting, and I think it kind of took root because we all imagined one-eyed fish hanging from the line, and like a lighthouse that changes into a robot, and a giant crustacean that's like the biggest thing we'd seen in a Ratchet game. So, that kind of took life. Like from that brainstorm, we went into the process of seeing how it stacked up against our goals for the game, getting it to work for our goals. So that led to some more refined brainstorming, which then led to even more refined brainstorming about what this could be. Now we're getting into layout sketches, so we're getting some sense of what the flow through the location is like, what the village looks like, what the enemies you fight are. That gets even more refined. Here's a really nice image from Dave Gerton. And then that led to an even more refined idea of what this giant crustacean could actually be. And then, all of that together led to this location that's seen here in a fairly resolved state. Just about ready for the world. This is something we call a diorama in production. It's just a look at what the location is, sort of independent of all the gameplay. But we're still kind of figuring out how the pieces fit together, how wide walkways need to be for the player. You can see all the component elements in there, like a tentacle will just grab the fish, which happens in the real game. This is like a very far along visualization of what the idea is that we could use to evaluate a lot of different things and then react to what we saw. So we go through this village, and then at the very end, this is all running on the PlayStation 3, because we know if we do it on the hardware, we'll be able to use the pieces later. At the very end, we have the lighthouse in the distance and this giant crustacean, which is called the Crawdaddy, by the way, because we had just moved to North Carolina, and we thought maybe people said Crawdaddy. I don't know. I don't think anybody says that. I've never heard anybody say that. So I'm really fascinated by how we get from this all the way to this. And that's what I set out to deconstruct, because even though we've been through this a few times, some part of this still seems kind of magic. I think that's because we don't actually go through things in the laid out order of what I just showed you. It's a lot more organic. There are usually many ideas like going through the pipe at the same time. So a lot of this talk was me taking all those pieces that happen out of order and putting them in order. And in doing that, I kind of saw that we could get a lot of efficiency out of just doing things in the right order every single time. We're going to go through these stages that I'm talking about no matter what, but if we do them in a slightly more controlled way, then we can usually get decisions that lead to a more refined end result. So visualization, again, it's about defining the problem and then capturing ideas that fit that problem. When we talk about defining the problem, it's really just another way of talking about design. Design is nothing but a series of choices. And within that process of making choices, there are two different places you can be creative. And the first is in defining the criteria. This is just setting the goals for what you're doing. The second place you can be creative is in capturing ideas, which is just another way of talking about brainstorming. And as I'll talk about later, I'm using the word capture for a reason, because that's such an important part. We think it's best to define the criteria first. There are different ways you could do it, certainly. It's kind of tempting to start out with brainstorming because in a lot of ways it's the fun part. Everybody wants to get their ideas out at the beginning of a project. But we find that at the very beginning we have a clear head, and we can talk about what we want to make, thinking of the ideal. We're thinking about what we like, what we're passionate about, what we think our fans will like, what we think has a chance to really make a connection. And those things are, sort of pure, sort of uncontaminated by anything else in the process. So a lot of times the first ideas we have when we think back end up being the right ideas. And not always, but it happens a surprising amount of the time. During this part of the process, it's really important that we set up like real goals and not tasks. And I'll tell you what I mean. A goal is something that you can use to measure progress. A task is just something that you do. So for this game, for Ratchet & Clank All for One, we knew we wanted to make a game that emphasized cooperative play. If the game had a thesis statement, that thesis statement would be that it creates the experience of teaming up with your friends to fight in spectacular battles and unravel the mystery of an alien world. That's like a mouthful. I mean, it's hard to apply that to every problem and understand how we're stacking up. So, we need something better than that. Let's imagine that we're designing a mechanic for this game. We can say, design a mechanic for a cooperative game. That's really just a task. It doesn't really tell us much about what we're doing. So we always look for a way to turn our set of main goals for the game into something that we can carry around with us in our heads. So, goals for this game would be, we want the player to feel like they're part of the team. We want the player to constantly develop real skills when they play. We want the player to always stay on their toes with a really developed sense of pacing. We want the player to understand the game intuitively because it maps to something in the real world. Well, we take all that and we distill it down into cooperative, active, kinetic, and easy to understand as our top line goals for a game mechanic. And that spells cake, which is cheese ball, but also, I know, acronyms embarrass me on some level, but this also became something that we could carry around with us. We could think, here's an idea that someone mentioned for a 4-player fishing game where, it's kind of like a war of attrition. You're sitting around a pond and you're all trying to fish together. Hey, it's cooperative, you're doing it together, but it's not active, it's not kinetic. Suddenly we can start to examine ideas with this criteria and decide which ideas are going to work for the game and which ideas aren't going to work. So it becomes this tool that we can use. And certainly it's not everything. All kinds of other judgment needs to come into play, but it's something. It really kind of helps us narrow the field. We use this quite a lot during production, and we used it so much, in fact, that it's part of every production now to come up with these little mind nuggets, which I just made up. But these things that we carry around that we can apply to a lot of different situations. The second part of the visualization process for us is capturing. And again, this is brainstorming. It's tempting to think of this as the fun part, and it is fun. It should be fun, but it's not just for fun because we're really producing the raw material that we're going to turn into the game. So when we do this, we brainstorm with a very large group of people. Virtually everyone in the team participates. And I'll tell you why we do it that way. It's because we have seen over the years that we get the best results when we get everybody's contribution and everybody's best ideas. It is certainly a viable approach to have one creative genius who knows everything, who's always right. There are people like this in the world. There are games that have been very successful with that model of the one creative like auteur. It's just not how we work. I'm not that person. I don't know that person. We just have a team that works really well together to solve problems. So we feel like if everybody's contributing and we're listening, then we kind of get the best shot from everybody's best idea about what the game can be. And all of that really does go into the finished game. It's not just like a fake morale booster. It's actually the way we operate every day. So it's not uncommon in our studio to see 20 or 30 people gathered around a whiteboard talking about ideas and just getting everything written down for later. And so that writing it down is why we call this capturing, because brainstorm sounds ephemeral. You can think of ideas and they can just go away if you're not careful. We try to get them on the whiteboard or we write them up in notes, and we make sure that we document these things because we go back to them all the time. Like frequently we'll look back at our reservoir of ideas that we've built up over the years and find this perfect solution that maybe we came up with 3 years ago. It maybe wasn't the right time for it then, but now is the right time. And so, in the Seaside Village model that I mentioned, here, when we brainstorm, we start to think of what this giant crustacean battle can be like. And, maybe it's about like a giant surprise intro. You think you're at the end of the level, but, suddenly this massive creature rises up to challenge you. Maybe you water ski to get away from him and, power out these electric harpoons to bring him down. And then he chases you up the lighthouse. And then at the top of the lighthouse, you feed him electric jellyfish, which gives him indigestion, and he gets furious and rips the lighthouse in half. So you could see like ideas are kind of spiraling off and kind of getting a life of their own, but they're building up a lot of steam at this point. Because not only are we brainstorming, we're also examining everything against the goals that we put into place to see what we think is going to work best. So at some point we're going to get this set of ideas that we can just kind of tell has traction. And we're going to stop brainstorming a little bit. We're going to start talking about these specific ideas, and we're going to start arguing a little bit. Well, I think this one's going to be the best thing for the game. No, clearly, you don't know what you're talking about because the crustacean shouldn't chase you up the lighthouse. The lighthouse should turn into a boxing robot, and you should battle him that way. When we get to this point in the process, it's time to move on. Because we can never successfully satisfy these arguments because it's all theory. We don't really know which of those things is going to fit in yet. It takes time to remember that sometimes, but nobody has all the answers at that point. And that's when we move to the prototype stage. The prototype is the ultimate test. This is what we can use to really examine our ideas and decide if they're going to work for the game or not. So it's about testing the idea and evaluating that test to see what is working and what isn't. Sorry, this clicker is possessed. I'm clicking, by the way, 30 times for every slide that advances. There we go. So when we're prototyping, we're doing the thing that gets the idea into the game the most quickly. In other words, we don't care what it looks like. I mean, we've got a rough model here and this like Ratchet model that's all segmented and weird, and a lot of them look worse than this. We're doing the least amount possible to actually test the idea, because we're not going to show this to the world, unless it's at a talk like after the game has already shipped. So we're just looking at an idea specifically and talking about what's going to work and what isn't. Or maybe we have a rough for like an attack. This creature called the bouncer minion, flattens Ratchet out when he does this melee attack. Okay, well, we're gonna rough that out and get it into the game with this stepped animation that goes quickly because it's not all splined out and smooth, and we're just gonna see what's working and what isn't. This is from Bill Buxton's Sketching User Experience, and it's a little graphic that stuck with me because it just kind of rings true. But all this is over on the left, imagine that's this giant funnel of all the ideas we've accumulated. And as time marches on, the investment increases. So, more and more people are spending hours working on the problem, but also the weight of the design criteria increases. So we're examining these things against our goals as we go, and we're narrowing everything down. So we're moving from giant bucket of ideas down to, very small, like glass of ideas at the end. And we're going to narrow that down even more until it becomes the one thing that actually wins out and gets in the game. Clicker must be within range. There we go. This is another prototype example, and this is a thing called the vacu. And you can see, here we have Clank with just a gun that we had. This was to solve a very specific problem. We knew we wanted one character to be able to pick up another character and throw them, but actually doing that turned out to be really problematic. We have 4 hero characters. They have to grapple with each other in a specific way. We tried to have everyone physically picking up everyone else, but you get into a ton of iterations. You have Clank, this tiny robot, picking up Quark, who's giant. Then you have Quark, who's giant, picking up tiny Clank. You get into all kinds of weird permutations that seem like more more effort than we should put into that problem because it also wasn't cool when you just picked them up and threw them. So we came up, actually, one of our animators, Brent Whittington, and one of our programmers, Joel Bartley, worked together and came up with this solution, which was perfect. Very elegantly, we could have a device that lets you pick up another player and throw them. It's very much part of the Ratchet universe to have gadgets and weapons, and this thing morphed into this thing, called the vacuum that we ended up using in the real game. So a gadget that's made expressly for picking up your friends and throwing them into battle. We didn't start out thinking that we were going to make the vacuum, and that's kind of an important point. When we're prototyping, we try to keep an open mind, and we try to listen to what the game is telling us. So sure, we go back to those goals that we came up with in the beginning, that we made when our heads were clear. We measure up against them constantly, but we're not so regimented about it that we don't let a good idea kind of take a life of its own and morph a little bit. That's going to happen. Sometimes we go back and revise the goals we started with. We know that's part of the process. The simple fact that they were as close as they were in the beginning means that what we end up with is still going to be something that's viable for the game. This is another graphic from the Bill Buxton book that, again, just makes a lot of sense. This is about how you don't get too locked in to your initial ideas. This is what I get from it. Like on the far left, again, a ton of ideas are going into the mix. At each iteration, we're narrowing them down, but we're also keeping an open mind so that if more ideas come into play, we expand a little bit and then narrow those down. And as those march from left to right, we end up with that point of wonderfulness at the end that goes into the shipped game. So for every single thing we've ever done, even if we weren't thinking about this graph, we were going through this graph at one time or another. Everything in the game at any point exists somewhere along that continuum, and we're just going through the steps to get it to the very end. This is a prototype from All for One, and this was in the fairly early going. You can see there's weird stuff. It's all rough in a lot of ways. The geometry is just like a lot of grids, so we could see how big everything is. The characters, if you can tell, are all using the same animation. So there's no nuance with Clank being small and Quark being giant. It's just everybody running around like Ratchet. But this was a really effective prototype because we could see what was going to work and what wasn't going to work with the camera type that we're using, which was brand new for this game. We started to get some notion of the HUD and how we were going to record things. We just got a really good sense of the feel of the spaces we were working with, how big the places need to be, how far away the camera should be typically. Even like cool artistic things we could do, like set up this really nice directed view at the end of a segment. So this is the result of something that's gone through several stages of prototyping. Each of these elements kind of worked on individually, but then all brought together in a real game so that we could see what's working and what isn't and then react to it. And certainly the game went very far after this, but we still got quite a few things figured out at this early stage. And we did it quickly because we're not planting grass shrubs here. We're not making beautiful normal mapped shaders. We're just putting things together as quickly as we can to get a sense for what's going to work. Design is also compromise. I mentioned earlier that it's a series of choices, but we also compromise as we go. Much like the graphic I just showed, lots of other things are going to come into play as we get something closer and closer to production or even during production. We have to think about we have to think about what we can actually do with the number of people we have. We have to think about what the technology is going to support. We have to think about some marketing concerns. It doesn't come into play often, but we think about how everything's going to be received. The right idea is going to make it through that gauntlet of constraints and come out the other end essentially intact. And we don't always know what those ideas are going to be in the early going, but as we move through the process, things get filtered out, and what we end up with is the right thing just because it hit all of the constraints that we needed to hit. And during this time as well, we are always playtesting. We don't just rely on ourselves, although we do playtest ourselves every single day. We bring in people who have never touched the game before. We put a controller in their hand and we just sit back and watch. And this can be exhilarating when things work. It can be extraordinarily painful when things don't work and we will cry. But it's all good either way, because we know that if something worked, we're happy and we move on. Oh, we got that right. If something doesn't work, we know that we will learn from that. Something that doesn't work will always show a solution for something that does, provided we keep going through the steps of this process and iterating and pushing everything through. I just pulled, this is like attractive images section, because I pulled a lot of things that represent ideas that got really far in the process that started out with nothing but something on a whiteboard. So we have nice concept art of that one-eyed fish I talked about. Definitely made it into the real game. This like really cool crane that pulls aliens up out of the water. We have this thing that apparently, and I forgot this, was called the Xeno Turtle at one point. But it ended up being called the Tortomoth when we shipped, because we changed the names of things constantly. This thing that was called the flabberfish in the early going, and actually retained that when we shipped. We wanted this robotic bomber that had very specific behaviors that would fit into the combat sequence in a level in a certain way that made it all the way through to the end. These concept images are really refined because we have very talented concept artists, but they're also solving a lot of problems. Like, we're figuring out a lot of things when we draw. And these have been through several rounds of thumbnails to see what's going to work and what isn't. Again, that's another way of prototyping. Like, we're testing our ideas up against our goals and seeing what's going to go into the final game. Here's that lighthouse sequence where the giant crustacean chases you all the way to the top. These images again. This one, I mentioned we didn't actually do things in this order. This is one example. This sketch came really early on in the game, before even some of the whiteboard stuff. So at that point, the process is, what do we do with this giant crustacean that we think is really cool? I think about what would have happened had we done things in the opposite order, and I think we would have gotten better things at the end. So now, we have all of our ideas in place. We've prototyped everything. We have a good idea of what's going to work for the game. We know what we're making, in other words, and now it's time to make it. And this is the part, again, where we're going to get very tired, because it's like a rush to the end to get everything in place and to ship something that we're proud of. And this is about refining and shipping the ideas. So when we refine them, every single idea goes through this phase that's kind of like the really awkward adolescence. The thing is under construction, like in a really obvious way. When something's an idea, it's exciting because it's new. When something is in the prototype phase, it's still exciting because you are talking about the potential. You're thinking about what it's going to become. When things are at this stage, the only thing you see in front of you is the gap between where it is and where it needs to be to actually be something you're not embarrassed about. And that's kind of what motivates us on some level. We're pushing ahead, and we just have to have faith that this mess is going to turn into this when everything comes together, and then we'll be happy with it when we ship. This part of the process, over the years, it's gotten more and more fun for me. I mean, at times it used to be a slog. Now I just come to sort of appreciate it. It's the hard work. It's like just getting it done no matter what, taking all the stuff that we've been excited about and sticking with it. Not abandoning it just because it's not as exciting as it was during that first brainstorm, but pushing it through everything it needs to go through to reach its potential and become something that we want to put in the game. We become very deadline conscious at this point, and probably a lot less open-minded about new ideas, even though we should be open-minded to them. This is the point in the process where when someone brings up a new idea or starts to brainstorm, we sarcastically say, "That's a great idea for the next game." And it's always this fictitious next game that we're talking about. We might not even know what it is yet. But we'll pretend to write it down. And actually we try to really write things down. I totally made that up just now. So yeah, we have to have faith that these things that are rough get more refined as they go through the process. This level, which was called the Dead Grove eventually when it shipped, just started out as this kind of mess of tangled roots, but it went through all of its iterations. Again, this was one of those dioramas that we put together that, even though it happened fairly early in the process, we still really stuck to this in the game that we finally shipped. So this was nothing but an idea of somebody saying, wouldn't it be cool to be in a location that feels like what it looks like when you like turn over a log and there are like gross beetles and termites underneath, and just kind of like weird weird grubs, and it's just like what the in the dirt level. It's all about digging in the dirt. Then we have this enormous thing that ended up being called the wigwump at the end, although we called it the rootworm through most of production. But this is a boss that you fight in the game. So this is all stuff that turned out to be real after we pushed on it and made sure it all worked. This is an example of an idea that came up like years ago for another game completely. We talked in a previous Ratchet title about having this planet that was just coming undone. Gravity was low, so the pieces of the planet were gradually floating off into space, and the inhabitants were trying to chain everything together. So that idea, even though the game wasn't right for it at the time, was something that we remembered. Like at that point when we said, we'll write that down, we actually did write it down and save it for later. Now that became this real level. During production, we called this Crumbler Archipelago. And then that morphed into another one of these dioramas that we put together on the hardware. Then, we make these, and then we take all these pieces and we kind of reassemble them when we're making the real game spaces. And then after everything has gone through several passes of refinement and we're happy with it, and by the way, this part of the process takes a long time. This talk isn't exactly about production, but it could be. I mean, I could talk about this for a while too. After we go through this part of the process, we're ready to ship. And this is the glorious part where everything's going to come together. And then here's that seaside level that I mentioned. I don't think I have audio. It's okay. Imagine music. So here's the level like completely executed, and this is a little teaser trailer that we put together for what we shipped with. Oh, wow, thank you. Oh, thanks. There's our crawdaddy. There's the vacuum that I showed earlier. And he has giving himself the maneuver. He has the longest and most gratuitous enemy death sequence we've ever done. It goes on, you think it's over, and then it goes on, you get up and you get yourself a snack, and it's still going on. So again, the processes that we go through every single time, no matter what, even if we do them out of order, are visualization. This is when we define the goal and we capture ideas. Prototyping. This is when we test out the idea to see how it fits the goal and evaluate to see how it's going to fit in the game. There's production, or just producing it. This is when we know what we're doing, but we just do it. We refine and we ship the ideas to get them ready. And then finally, we have a shipped game at the very end, and this is still the greatest feeling in the world to finish. I don't think I'll ever get tired of it. To actually see this thing that started out as a couple of whiteboard ideas or just a conversation actually end up either on a store shelf or available for digital download is extremely gratifying. And no matter what you do, I recommend trying to chase that feeling, because it is a powerful thing that really keeps the work interesting every single time. When we ship, we always have some amount of what if. What if we had used this idea instead? What if we had done things a little differently? But the great thing is, the idea isn't gone forever if we don't ship with it. There's always the possibility that we're going to use it in the next game. So the best thing we do is we just start again, and maybe there's a place for the idea in the next one. And that's The end. Should I ask? Yeah, absolutely. I'll answer questions if anyone has them, or I'll try to answer questions. All right. Yes. Yes.
You talked a lot about the process of going through making the game. How does, I mean, from your perspective, how would, I mean, you said early on that when you just got out of college and you kind of got into one, how would somebody nowadays go about getting in their foot in the door? Because it's probably a lot harder.
Sure. Yeah, so the question is how would you go about getting your foot in the door if you were interested in making games? You know, I would say the best way to get a job making games is to make games. Because, and you know, I mean, that seems straightforward, but it's like there are a lot of tools out there now that are available that help you put games together that are available for free or cheap. And you know, more information is available now than there used to be about the whole process of putting something together. You know, we love it when we see portfolios from brand new people for design or programming or art or any discipline that are like resolved little game experiences. It shows that this person has already on their own power been through the process of putting something together and trying to make it fun. So when we get that, we're like, this is great. This person's probably going to be awesome. So that's the simple advice I have. Just pursue it. I mean, college helps, like starting to learn, you know, the pieces helps, but also just flat out making a game any way you can is a good way to get started. Cool. Other questions? Yes?
Does your company, did they have this kind of design theory when you came, or was it kind of something that you, stepping back after you guys have done it, has realized this is the kind of step-by-step process you go through?
Yeah, the question is, did we have this design theory intrinsically, or did we realize it later? We realized it later. It's something that we reflect after every project and maybe get a little better every time about like defining our process. But no, we've gone through a lot of different processes. Actually, we try a lot of different things just to see what's going to work. Yeah, we're a company who worked really closely with a guy named Mark Cerny for a long time, and he developed something called the Cerny method, which definitely has a lot of these ideas in it. I mean, don't get me wrong, these are things that didn't come out of nowhere. They've evolved every time. But I feel like design methodology is something that's almost more cultural. It's just more of an intuitive way of doing things and less about a complete process. We're not like going down a checklist saying, that can't go in the game. You know, we didn't go through the proper capture process for it. I mean, that doesn't happen. You know, we're trying to get better at the order of it, but these things kind of evolve over time. That's what I'm getting at. Cool. I think that back there went up first, the guy in the blue shirt.
What percentage of your project timeline would you say you spend doing prototyping versus?
Yeah. The question is, what percentage of our project time do we spend in prototyping versus production? And that's another thing that we mess with constantly. We like slide it around to see what works and what doesn't. For All for One, we actually spent a really long time on prototyping, like probably longer than ever, thinking, wow, we've never made a 4-player game where everybody shares a screen before. You know, we better make sure that our rough ideas are pretty solid before we start fleshing them out. Other times we might have a better idea of where we're starting with just because there are more examples out in the world or because we've done something before. In those cases, we slide back and it's less prototyping time and more time for production and polish. So it really just depends, and I don't know that we've hit on a best way yet. We just try to like get our approach to be better every single time. I will say that it doesn't do any good to shortchange either of those things. Both of them take time, and both of them just the more we can iterate, the better. You know, the more we can react to what we see on screen, the better the end result's going to be.
So we say 10-9?
Oh yeah. No, it's a lot closer to. Well, I'm gonna say that our current best thinking is probably about 35, 65. That's 35 prototyping up front, 65 production and getting it ready to ship. Yes, in the back.
Can you also talk about the visualization, how collaborative between the different departments you have, programmers and artists?
Yeah.
Involved in the visualization process?
We get everybody together because we find that the game happens in the spaces between the disciplines, which is, I don't know if maybe that's a weird thing to say, but it's like the game isn't all about making it look beautiful. It's not all about, you know, making like airtight code. It's about getting those two things to work together seamlessly. And what we found, and you know, this isn't the way we've always been. Like, we used to be much more compartmentalized, where an artist would kind of have their focus only on what's in front of them, or a programmer would be just programming with headphones on and not up talking to everybody. You know, we found that that doesn't really put the focus on the game the way it should. It's not all about doing the thing you do beautifully. It's about the way that thing works in context with everything else. So more and more, we mix it up. You know, we used to sit by department. Now everybody is just sitting next to each other. An artist will probably have a programmer on one side of them and a designer on the other side. And this leads to great organic conversations where everybody's just solving a problem and trying to make the game better, instead of getting into, well, you didn't give me enough time to do my artwork, or I didn't have enough time to program this. It's a lot more like, this is what we got to solve. Let's all get together and do it. So that's kind of been a long time coming, but we think that's the best way to do it now. Yes?
I have two questions. Firstly, I'm not a gamer and I'm not a business person.
Okay.
I sit here wonder why PlayStation as opposed to one of the other systems. And secondly, talk about one game beginning to end. When does it start? From
Sure.
this one to the next one.
Okay, so part A was why PlayStation, and we've had a long relationship with Sony Computer Entertainment over the years, and it's been a great relationship. We like working with them. So we were PlayStation exclusive for a long time. Just about a year ago, we announced that we are going multi-platform now with a title called Overstrike. So we are thinking about things a little bit differently. We're an independent company, but we've just had this great relationship with Sony over the years that these are just people we really like working with, is what it comes down to. And then for the second part, when do we start on the next one? It depends. We've done it differently just about every time. Sometimes a project will be on the back burner for a while before we really ramp up. Sometimes it's a really quick turnover where towards the very, very end, we start on the next thing and then move over to it. Depends on circumstance, and we feel like we can make it work either way depending on what happens.
Thank you so much.
Sure, thanks.